Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you all had a great day. I am currently not feeling great. I have a cold, but I'm gonna try to get through this mock draft post free agency now that we know where a lot of teams spent their money, where the top guys went, and a lot of teams have filled some needs that they might not take anymore in the draft, and other teams might have new needs because they lost a player a lot of people thought they were gonna keep. So with no further ado, let's get into the mock draft. Keep it simple with the um top pick. It's been the same guy since really the end of the regular season when the Rangers got the top pick. It's been Fernando Mendoza. Like easily no doubt top pick. Vegas, brought in a lot of talent around it. Brought in Tyler Linderbaum, Jalen Naylor. Um, really spent. Obviously, you wish they'd have um a second first round pick, so that way they'd be able to address another need. Obviously, that Max Crosby trade that did go through, the craziness. But the Raiders will obviously get the guy Mendoza. We're on the number two with the Jets. Um, I think it comes down between one of the edge rushers, and I think New York, kind of like what the Jags did a couple years ago when it was a debate between Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson. They went with Walker because he had the upside, and I think the Jets would select him. Real reasonable too. I just think it just makes way too much sense for the top Jets to address a big need. You trade away Jermaine Johnson, allows Quincy Williams, so clearly going to need help on that defensive side, and the Jets land a premier stud who hopefully can be a building block for the future. We are the Cardinals, who looks like they're going to go with Brissett and Minshew. Maybe they draft a rookie, but I think they want to protect their quarterback, and I think they would go with um, Francis Mauigoa out of the U. Um, he's just the consensus top overall tackle. And I think the Cardinals, who they did address the offensive line, bringing Isaac Sayamalu at guard. So they are trying to improve it for whoever that long-term quarterback is, and I think they continue it with going Maui Noah, especially when you restructure James Conner's contract. So you sign Tyler Algier, kind of showing that you're not going to go after Jeremiah Love if you're keeping guys um like restructuring the contracts and then signing running backs in free agency. So I think they go Maui Noah. Now here's where I think the draft really starts because I think Mendoza one is obvious. I think Reese at this point is probably two, and then Maui Noah seems three. So really Tennessee at four is where the draft starts. They could go one of the edge rushers. They could go with wide receiver Cardinal Tate, Jeremiah Love. Downs, it would be high for a safety, but I think could be a play. Maybe Sonny Styles. Like, there's a lot of guys for Tennessee to go with, and I think they bring in Jermaine Johnson and John Franklin Myers on the defensive side. They brought in Wandale Robinson to replace the departed Calvin Ridley, as they released both him and Snead um last week. So still have major holes, and I think the Titans um, who have kind of addressed the defensive line. You could say they could go with one of the edges because of the simple fact that, you know, Robert Saleh would love another piece on that defense. But I think, Saleh coming from the Jets, remember when they drafted Garrett Wilson to give Zach Wilson a top target? I think they're not going to go receiver. I think they go with Mr. Love and Jeremiah Love. It just makes a lot of sense. I know Tony Pollard's there and Tajay Spears is there, but I think the Titans makes sense going running back here. Help out Cam Ward, give him another playmaker, and can really help the Titans out. Moving on to the Giants at 5, I think they could go with plenty of directions. They could go receiver, linebacker, safety. Obviously, edge isn't a pick they would make this high because you have Burns and Carter, and I think they would go with Downs. You know, like signing Tremaine Edmonds wouldn't it wouldn't stop you from drafting Sonny Styles, but I think it gives them at least a linebacker for now. Even though they did need to fill the other linebacker spot on that Giants defense, but I think John Harbaugh coming over from the Ravens, being with Kyle Hamilton, um, I think he's gonna really want Downs, and it gives this defense a superstar on the back end to complement that front seven, or so front four, but and I think Downs ends up being the pick as of now. But out of 6 with the Browns, I think it comes down between tackle and receiver. I mean, I think they could go with one of the receivers because of how bad that receiving core is, and they have addressed the offensive line with Elton Jenkins, Zion Johnson, Titus Howard. So they have brought in a lot of guys to fill those needs where it's like you could go receiver and it would make a lot of sense. But it seems like a lot of people think Mauro Freely out of Georgia, the left tackle, is going to end up being this pick. So I'm going to have the Browns go with an offensive lineman and address this offensive line to protect whoever that franchise quarterback is. Moving on to the Commanders at 7. Obviously, we're big spenders with Odafe Owe, Leo Chanel, Nick Cross, Jacob Conco, really going there and spending a lot of money on guys. So I think, receiver is possible with this team because you have Terry McLaurin and then not much else. But I feel like defense just makes so much sense. Like it's just it's clearly a bigger need than I feel like a lot of people are talking about. And so I'm gonna go David Bailey. Well, I think could fall to Washington if like we see some other guys go ahead of them. But the Saints at 8. This could be a Ruben Bain team. I wouldn't hate it. Um, Saints, bringing Travis Etienne. So clearly, the Saints and Chiefs clearly believe that they're not going to be able to get Jeremiah Love. So I think that shows that like they knew Love was going to go higher than um their pick, so they went out and addressed that position in free agency. So I think the Saints could go receiver, possibly linebacker. Demario Davis no longer there. Um, but I think I'm gonna go Carnell Tate out of Ohio State. I just think, um, just bring another weapon. They brought in Travis Etienne to be the RB1. They signed David Edwards to help out this offensive line. So they're clearly going all in on protecting Shuck and giving him weapons. And I think Tate would be a phenomenal pick for the Saints team to really maximize this window with Shuck on a rookie contract. But on to the Chiefs at 9. Could go in a lot of different directions. Could go potential tackle. But I'm gonna go Ruben Bain. I just think it makes a lot of sense. Um, they need another pass rusher. Yeah, because Jordan Karlaftis early on was good, but hasn't really been that great the last couple of years. And you have Chris Jones, who's getting up there in age, and he can play both inside and out. But you need a guy on the edge. And Bain, who yes has small arms, but I think will be a day one elite player. And I think Bain is kind of being slept on. I think like if his arms were as long as like Bailey's or Reese's, I feel like he'd be the no doubt number 2 overall pick, and nobody would be questioning it. What are the Bengals at 10? Obviously, I think they go with their best defensive prospect on the board, and that's Sonny Styles, who I could see him going um at 5. I could see him going seventh, um, possibly even ninth to the Chiefs because Leo Chanel left. But I think Bengals defense, you can bring in Blaine Mafe and um what's his name? Brian Cook to help out that defense, but there's still a lot of holes on this defense. And if they want to get back to competing in the playoffs, they're going to have to make good decisions in the draft, and that starts at number 10. But on to number 11 with the Dolphins. Um, I think this could be one of the receivers. Just because um, no more Tyreek Hill. I guess you have guys like Malik Washington and others. I think they recently signed Jalen Tolbert from the Cowboys, so could go receiver, but corner is a bigger issue, and I think this is Mansour Delane. Um, Miami has needed cornerback ever since they traded away Jalen Ramsey last offseason. Even with him, the corner room wasn't that great, and I think the Dolphins need to set a tone with their first pick. I think they need to set a tone because, like, you bring in Malik Willis, and there's a lot of will he work out, will he not? But I think in the draft they need to just hit on these picks because the old regime and Chris Greer, was really bad at selecting guys in the first round. Yeah, outside I think maybe like Laramie Tunsil, Minka Fitzpatrick, as to it kind of worked out. Jalen Waddle. So probably like 3 guys there. Like he's rarely been that great at drafting, and I think they need to hit on these picks if they want to be competitive in the years to come. But on to the Cowboys at 12. I think in a similar situation to the Bengals or Washington, go best defender available. And I think they might end up going with Keldrick Falk out of Auburn. Um, I think Falk is kind of underrated in a sense. Like I feel like a lot of people see that like he didn't have a lot of sacks throughout his career, and he was mainly a run stuffing edge. But I think he has the potential. I think he's the youngest player in this class, or at least one of them, because he's gonna start the year at like 20 years old. Um, so I think Falk can become that pass rusher and give this Cowboys team a elite pass rusher that they really had with Micah Parsons, and maybe it'll work out. But out of the Rams at 13, I think this is an easy Makai Lemon pick. I just think if Lemon, Tyson, maybe even Tate is on the board, I think the Rams will, immediately rush on and slam dunk that pick. Like, it is just a no doubt pick. Devontae Adams apparently is in trade rumors. I don't know how true those are, but you're gonna have to pay Puka. How much longer is Adams gonna play if he is back with the Rams because he has 1 year left on his deal? I think Lemon could give this Rams offense another playmaker. So whenever Stafford leaves, they have all these playmakers for whoever their next quarterback is, and they're able to continue to compete in the NFC. To the Baltimore Ravens at 14. Obviously traded this pick and we got it back in the weirdest move of the offseason. And I think they would easily go Vega Owane from Penn State. He just, the Ravens need an offensive line help. Side John Simpson, which was an interesting move. Like I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but thought it was an interesting move, and um I think the Ravens would love this pick. So I have to work out center because for some reason they let Tyler Linderbaum go. I know it was a huge contract and they weren't going to pay that, but in over a year, um, to get this extension done and they didn't get it, I think that's crazy. Um, moving on to the Bucks at 15. This was a big spot for Kenny Sadiq, but they bring back K-Dot, so I don't think they'd want to go tight end in the first round. I think they'd address the defensive side of the board, side of the ball. Yeah, I think they could go edge. Maybe King Mizador as a plug-in guy right there, linebacker. Yeah, I think maybe if Sonny Styles falls, although they did bring in Alex Anzalone, so like Levante David still a free agent. The secondary because they lost out on um Jamel Dean. Um, I am gonna go with corner. I think I'm gonna go with Jermaine McCoy, who yes didn't play at all in 2025 and is still dealing with that injury because he didn't work out the combine. I think he will participate at his pro day if it hasn't yet happened. Um, and I think the Bucks, who are trying to contend in the NFC, are in a win now window, need to bring in good players to help out um this team. And I think McCoy makes a lot of sense for this Bucks off defense. So I don't know why I said offense. What are the Jets at 16? I think I could see this being where the tackles, if you want to push them in the guard, because they lost both guards. I could see this being a receiver because um they don't have really anybody outside of Garrett Wilson on this roster. And you bring in a lot of veteran guys on this team to hopefully instill something so that they're more competitive. And I think they are going to go Jordan Tyson, like, yeah, at 16. Like McCoy, he has injury concerns and has more concerns than um McCoy does because he just has an ACL tear. Tyson's had like a broken collarbone, a torn meniscus, like all throughout his college career. Um, but I think Tyson um can fit this Jets offense and give Geno Smith another target to throw to, and eventually the future quarterback, whether it's 27, 28, who knows. But are the Lions at 17, not 18, that's the Vikings. Um, I think tackle is in play because you lose Taylor Decker. Well, they released him because he wanted to be moved on from. They brought in Cade Mays, so they secure that center position. I think I am going to go with um, Spencer Fano out of Utah. One of the two Utah tackles that could go in the first round. And yeah, I mean, he can be your like you can move Penasul over to the left side. Fano can be your right tackle, or you could possibly put him in at guard. He fits a lot of positions, and this Vikings team, I mean this Lions team, trying to get back to the playoffs. I need to go back to how the rebuild started when they started with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell's first pick was Panay Sewell. Go with Spencer Fano and um build those trenches again so you can be competitive. But out of the Vikings at 18, I think this is an easy pick in Dylan Thieneman. Um, I could see him going, as high as maybe the Bengals. That does seem unrealistic. Maybe the Cowboys at 12. Like he could go a lot higher than this. And Harrison Smith was released, so clearly they're at least moving on from him from his current contract. Um, and Thieneman could be the perfect safety to replace him for the future with, and possibly now, and give Brian Flores another unique chess piece he could use on this defense. But out of the Panthers at 19, I'm going to go Kenyon Sadiq. Usually this has been a defensive prospect, but when you go out and sign Jalen Phillips to that huge contract, when you go out and sign Devin Lloyd, kind of their two biggest issues outside of like maybe corner, um, on the defense, it makes you more in line to have Kenyon Sadiq go to this pick. I think it'd be a phenomenal fit. It would give Bryce Young another weapon. You could have Sadiq, McMillan, Coker, maybe Xavier Legette can finally figure it out, and they can have a young core on this offense that can get this Panthers team possibly to be more successful in 2026. But the Cowboys at 20 obviously went um Keldrick Falk um at 12. I think at 20, I think they would go once again on defense. Well, yeah, you could say offensive line, but I'm gonna go defense with Avion Terrell out of Clemson. Yeah, Avion Terrell. Um, Obviously the younger brother of AJ Terrell, but not the similar type of player. Terrell's more of a nickel, although I could see him playing on the outside. And with no more Trayvon Diggs, Deron Bland is clearly not as good as he once was. Um, like this could be safety. Maybe if Thieneman falls, maybe you go EMW, but they did bring in Jalen Thompson on the back end. You trade for Rashawn Gary. Um, maybe you want this to be a linebacker, Cowboys fans, because um just because they need a linebacker, but there are potential trades of like Patrick Queen or somebody like that. So maybe Alice ends up landing a guy like that, and they can address the secondary with one of their two picks. But on to the Steelers at 21, I think it comes down to whether you think Ty Simpson would go here or whether you don't. I don't believe he will, and I think the Steelers would go with Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana. Yes, they um what's the word? Yeah. Like yes, they traded for Michael Pittman and extended him for 3 more years. So yeah, Metcalf and Pittman. You have Rico Dowdle with Jalen Warren, you have Pratt Fireman and Darnell Washington, but why not add another weapon? Like you could say maybe defense, but they shored up the secondary with Jamel Dean. You could possibly say safety, and I wouldn't hate it with EMW, but I just think you give Rodgers and whoever the future quarterback is in Pittsburgh another weapon to rely on. But are the Chargers at 22? If Vega Wane was here, I would go him. You could maybe say one of these guys. You could say one of these guys if you want to push them in at guard. But I think they end up going edge rusher. You lose Odafe away. Khalil Mack's coming back for 1 more year. I'm gonna go with Akeem Mesidor out of Miami. You're gonna be an older rookie at 25, but can give you instant impact, which is what the Chargers need, and can give you a guy who can come in and immediately help you out. I feel like Mesidor, if he's gonna get drafted in the first round, he should go to a team that like is trying to contend it right away instead of a team that like it's gonna take a couple years because he's a guy who's more so like what you get his rookie year is kind of probably like the ceiling of what you're going to get. And I feel like a rebuilding team or a retooling team shouldn't draft a guy who might decline in production as his rookie contract goes. Moving on to the Eagles at 23. Brought back Dallas Goedert, so even if Kenyon City was here, I don't think they would go with him. Though it's just a 1 year deal, so maybe. I think um edge is the big issue because they brought in Tariq Woolen, who hopefully will fortify that secondary. They did lose Reed Blankenship, the Kobe Dean, and Jalen Phillips, so you could go with linebacker or safety. But Phillips was a guy who really helped this team to really elevate their defense once he was traded from Miami to Philly. So I think they're going to try to bring in that same production. And I'm going to go Zion Young out of Missouri, one of my favorite prospects in this class. And I think the Eagles would love this pick. But out of the Browns at 24, obviously went Monroe Freely earlier. So I think this pick would be on wide receiver Casey Concepcion. I just think the Browns, um, they need to address both the offensive line and the receiver position in the first round. And I think um, they will end up doing that because the draft kind of, figures out like you could go with the top receiver and then go tackle later, or you possibly could go tackle at first and then there'd still be a wide receiver two available. And they're picking. Moving on to the Bears at 25. I think this definitely is defensive. Um, lost Jaquan Brisker and CJ Gardner Johnson. And Kevin Byard, so lost all three of their safeties. Did bring in what's his name from the Seahawks, Kobe Bryant. But they still need to um address the position. And I'm gonna go EMW. Emmanuel McNeil Warren at Toledo. I think he is a first round prospect, and I like what this Bears team has done. They brought in Kobe Bryant, Devin Bush, to really help out this defense. So you could see, Peter Woods, or if you wanted to go with like an edge, like TJ Parker, Cassius Howell, I wouldn't hate it, but I think safety, you lose three guys, have only brought in one. You're gonna have to bring in at least one more, if not multiple more guys. I think they can use that on a draft pick. But on the Bills, which it usually has been a receiver, but you trade for DJ Moore. Doesn't mean they're done focusing on the receiver position, but clearly they're trying to address it in trades and not really the draft. Because they haven't really hit outside of Khalil Shakir on drafting receivers. So I think instead they would go, um, possibly offensive line. Did lose David Edwards. But I think they would go with defense. I would go with TJ Parker out of Clemson, a guy who had a lot of hype pre-draft. Clemson wasn't as good, and Parker kind of um not benefited, but was the opposite of benefited. I can't think of it, but the opposite of benefited from Clemson being bad. But Parker's still a really talented edge, and look, we saw what they did with Greg Rousseau. Maybe they can do the same thing with TJ Parker. A talented edge who might go later in the first round, but can still be a disruptive piece for that Bills defense. Remember the Niners? Which I think this is an easy pick of tackle. I don't know. With Caleb Lomu out of Utah, Trent Williams either could be traded or released. So, it's kind of crazy. And I think whether he is or isn't a Niner in 2026, they're still going to need to help out this offensive line. And I think going Lomu could really help him out. But on to the Texans at 28. Brought in Brandon Smith, extended at Ingram. So are trying to put pieces of the offensive line together. So I think instead I'm gonna go Peter Woods at Clemson, a guy who, like his teammate TJ Parker, really talented, just was not on a great team this year. And I think Houston, who, has all the pieces on defense except for D tackle, I think would benefit from Woods' presence. We're on to the Chiefs, which this is from the Trent McDuffie trade that happened last week. So the Chiefs obviously went with Ruben Bain. I think with Denzel Boston still on the board, I think I'm gonna take him. You know, the Chiefs need um better receivers. Rashi Rice, Xavier Worthy haven't really worked out as first and second round picks. So I think KC could go defense with their first pick, and then if they still have this pick, unless they like maybe trade it, the Chiefs could lock in a receiver and give this offense another piece for Mahomes once he's back. We're on the Broncos at 30. I think this um is a CJ Allen pick. I think you release String Greenlow, who's back with the Niners. Brought back Alex Singleton, but still need another linebacker. I think Allen would be a phenomenal fit. Patriots at 31. I think it's clear offensive line is a big need. Now I know Blake Miller out of Clemson to help this Patriots team out. And then finally, 32nd overall, the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going to have them go with cornerback Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina. And that'll do it for this post free agency mock draft. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. But until then, hope you have a great day and bye.